Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. This is Nathan Rodall here with one of my all-time favorite people, Dr. Anna Jensen. Hi, Anna. Would you tell us just a little bit about yourself and what you do and what makes you such a prominent member of the music community here in the PNW?
Oh, goodness. Such flattery already. Thank you, Nathan.
Of course.
Um, I have a few different hats that I get to wear. So one of them being I teach at Central Washington University. I teach bass there. I also teach at Pacific Lutheran University, where I teach bass and the string education classes. And then I get to work at Tacoma Youth Symphony as their education coordinator and as one of their conductors. And then I do education consulting for Symphony Tacoma, where I also get to be the assistant principal bass. And so in my free time, I get to do some playing. So I play in the symphony here and the ballet.
Wait, you have free time?
At least that's what I like to call it. And then I teach a few pre-college students as well.
Great. Now, what we are here to talk about today is just like bass in general. And a lot of the times, not necessarily in my situation here in Port Angeles, and I don't know how the winds aligned when I was at Rogers last year. I had more basses than violas. I don't know how it happened. I suspect because some of them were your students. But a lot of us orchestra teachers out there are always thinking about switching a student to bass. And a lot of times that means a cello or viola or violin student who's taking private lessons and maybe just is a little bored playing Richard Meyer and Brian Balmages and just wants a new challenge. So if I'm a student that's thinking about switching to bass, well, first, what do I need to know in terms of the mechanics of the instrument? I've got a bow buddy here, if you know what a bow buddy is. Maybe you can help me build I can show you my violin bow hold, and you can help me get to a bass bow hold.
Sure thing, yeah.
And then maybe we can talk about some of the materials that you sent over and which of those might be applicable to that particular student. So, so bow hold, now in violin land, we cover the eye and we have pinky on top. How do I get to bass bow hold with minimal resistance?
You know what? I can grab my daughter's bow here. I've got a mini bow over here. So with that, the transition.
And maybe we should just pause for a second because there is German bow and French bow. And for my students, they know I am anti-German bow.
Oh, no.
Because, well, I am not a bass teacher. I'm not like an authority. And I know anything you can do with a French bow, you can do with a German bow if you have a teacher to help you do that. You can do both with either. But as a group classroom teacher, if I can teach everybody with as few variables as possible, that works best for me. But if you've got a private teacher, German bow is great. But I'm primarily a German bow person moving forward throughout this conversation.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I can do French bow. If you want, I can grab the German bow too. So
that'd be great to see. Yeah, that'd be great.
Both of those here. So essentially, coming from a chin instrument and heading over to the bass, we're going to bring our pinky down. And the biggest thing that I talk about a lot is getting the middle on metal. And so it's a lot of
finding that the ferrule and then putting the middle finger on ferrule.
Yep. And so bringing that down, immediately coming down, that's going to bring your pinky down as well. A lot of bass players tend to be a little bit quirkier, and so I talk about middle on metal, and then we actually get to poke the frog's eye out.
Yeah, I think this is the cello bow, so the proportions are a little different, but I try to teach pinky somewhere near the eye, just so that they have a similar reference as everybody else.
Yep.
But middle on middle, I like that. I think we can work with that.
Yeah, so that really, really helps with the balance. We don't want to get too far back or immediately the tip is going to start dropping and they're going to...
Yeah, well, and then the thumb just falls apart. Thumb's got to be the most important part no matter what you play. And then, thank you for that upside down, inside out view. That's the most important right there.
Right, and getting that nice bumpy thumb. And so one of the most important parts of bass French bow hold is that it
Uh-huh.
actually works like a teeter totter. And so you've got your thumb, and then the first finger,
Hmm.
pinky are going to teeter totter back and forth on that. And so working on that counterbalance right there. And
Uh-huh.
I've got one bodybuilder muscle on my whole body, and it's right there, right on
Oh
the
yeah.
hand,
Yep.
where all
Pinky
that
power.
counterbalance is happening. Absolutely. And then I can grab the German bow as well.
As I'm remembering back, I think I may have had a total brain fart and mixed up which I meant to say. I try to teach French only.
French only. No worries.
If I had said it backwards, I apologize, internet world. I meant French only. I'm open to German, but you got to have a private teacher if you're going to do German.
And then German bow hold's going to be different. And there's a bunch of different ways to hold the German bow, just like the same as the French bow.
Hmm.
With this one, how I was taught by my teacher is she keeps it really, really simple. And so we would do the circle on the top,
Okay.
and then the middle finger supports the weight of the bow. So the middle finger is what's going to really make sure that the bow doesn't fall and we don't end up with
So that's the pivot point.
exactly. And so middle finger right there on the stick, ring finger gets to hang out in the frog's mouth.
Only one finger in the frog's mouth.
Only one finger, and then the pinky just hangs out underneath. And so she would have us do a lot of what she would call his grandpa's rocking chair.
Uh-huh.
And so we'd swing it between the thumb and the pinky, and then you flip the bow and catch it with your middle finger. So the middle finger is really, really important to support. And then the weight gets to go in on the top of the stick through the thumb and a little bit through the first finger.
Okay. Now, for anybody out there who's a bass teacher watching this video, at what point do you think about switching a student from French to German or German to French? What are the benefits there?
Right. A lot of very young students, and so like if I've started a second grader, often we'll try on a little French bow, but it's just too much. I mean, these bows are pretty heavy compared to a violin bow.
Okay,
So the underhand bow is going to be a little bit easier for them to navigate.
understood.
Yeah, and then a lot of times, I mean, people end up playing French or German bow by whatever they have in their classroom and what bows aren't.
Yeah, mm-hmm, exactly.
And so, it's like one of my students, I said, "Oh, how'd you do French bow?" And they're like, "It's the one that had the most hair on it." And so that was that was it. Now I do every once in a while, like with my university students, where if somebody's developed so much tension in their French bow hand
Uh-huh.
and issues and they're having pain, we will take a little break from that and switch to German bow as
Hmm.
like an opportunity for them to learn it for when they teach in the future, or they will stick with it just because they finally no longer have that tension and pain.
Mm.
Yeah.
But I think we were talking about it earlier. Anything that can be done with French, but you can do it with German too.
Mhm.
It's not that
Absolutely.
it's limiting in any way.
No,
I,
no.
and my only reason for French only is just there's enough that's different about bass. I mean,
Hmm.
everything an orchestra teacher says in a classroom is everybody do this except bass.
Right.
And so if we can just have as a teacher, everybody on French, that's
Hmm.
one less thing that's everybody except bass.
Right. Hmm.
And basses feel
Absolutely.
alienated enough just with the number of measures that they have to sit there and do nothing, and then they don't come in, and then you're mad that they didn't come in, but there probably wasn't a great cue. So it's just one less thing for me. But now let's get back to let's good student who has decided that they want to switch to bass in orchestra class,
Hmm.
just to give them an extra challenge. What are the first things that they need to consider?
So consideration would be getting them both an instrument at school and at home. So that's the first logistic.
Yes.
That's really important is having that. Other is really,
I
really
just had to stop or pause the recording for a second there? You cut
Okay.
out on me. Would you just
Oh, sorry.
back up for like 10 seconds?
Sure. So we're just saying, so getting them the bass at home, and then the other part would be is getting a bass clef under control.
Mm-hmm.
So getting a really strong sense of bass clef. And then from there, making sure that their setup is correct. So whether you're going to have them stand or whether you're going to have them sit. And so making sure that when they're first approaching the instrument, that it's very balanced and
Mm-hmm.
we're not getting bad habits that they're wrestling, having to hold up the instrument.
Now, just based on the available equipment at a school, I prefer not a short, but a shorter stool,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can translate some of the elements from cello and give kids the security of they're not worrying about the bass moving around while standing.
Right.
But if I'm a teacher who doesn't have enough stools for everybody, how can a bass player find the same security that they get seated on a stool?
So like it's just learning the proper stance.
Uh-huh.
Learning to balance the bass is going to be the most important part for that. Which there is a great sequence for teaching the stance. If you want me to go through that real quick, I can.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so I've got a baby bass here that I think will fit me in the picture a little bit better.
Great.
I've got my daughter's 8th size bass. And so with the stance, with this, what we're looking for is getting it to the point where the bass can balance as much by itself. And so what we want to avoid is the bass falling backwards, because the only thing that's behind the bass is going to be your left thumb. And so that's
Yeah.
a lot of the students with those issues. And so setting them up for a good stance is essentially having them come to the side of the bass, getting the bass to balance. So I saw the super bass, and then we just lightly tuck our left leg behind, our right foot opens up. And so that brings the bass nice and upright and balanced for people to use.
Mm-hmm.
So with that it's not falling over. The things that we want to avoid is the cello approach. So we don't want the cello approach.
Yeah.
When standing.
More at an
We also
angle.
don't want, right, and we also don't want the buddy bass approach where the bass is falling back.
Oh, yeah. I see a lot of that.
Yeah. So it's really important to get this part right here tucked in right on the front of the hip, and so that it locks in right there. And so you get this feeling of the fingertip pulling into your hip.
Now, one of my mentors as an educator and just all-around human being, Joe Divig, something that he taught me when learning bass was that it's you encounter so many problems when you're squeezing between thumb and fingers, and you get a lot of young players who say that it's too hard to squeeze the string.
Right.
And from Joe, he's saying, well, take the thumb away altogether. It's your arm pulling back and stopping the string. How does that work when you're standing? Because I've tried it when standing, and I don't feel like there's anything resisting the pull of the arm back. Is it different, or is there enough to hold the bass in that position?
There's enough there. Well, it's that same feeling where you're going fingertip to your hip. So you're the bass, so fingertip to hip, and that was something my teacher in grad school just like religiously just drilled in us, a fingertip to hip. And with that, I mean, for bass, getting these great big huge strings down, I mean, our E string is seriously about that big around.
Oh, yeah.
And so this whole idea, and I wrote a silly blog on it on my website, but so many students, they just press the strings down. And if we only press, so if I only press, my knuckle's going to collapse no matter what I do if I just press.
And that's any string instrument.
Exactly. So you have to have this certain percentage of pull.
Arching.
Yeah. And so for bass, I'm thinking it's probably about 20% pull and 8% press. And that's what's going to keep those fingers rounded. But if they're standing and they're thinking fingertip to hip, that's really going to create that connection with the system.
So we've got a kid, they can hold the bass properly, but when we go to finger some notes, I see two things that happen, and the right answer is somewhere in between.
Right.
So either they're doing the Jascha Heifetz chicken wing, which is going to destroy their shoulder in a week, or T-Rex arm.
Right.
Erects are much more common because, well, I can rest my elbow on the bass.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's very lazy. You're very efficient with your energy there, but you're not getting very good sound. So what should I be thinking about as I'm forming my left hand position on the bass?
Right. I'll grab the baby bass here again. So with this, it's so tricky with the large instrument, so I'm trying to use the tiny one. So with the bass, as I'm coming in, the arm can like hover in this zone. We just don't want to ever have the rest. So hovering is okay. Hovering's okay as long as it's not resting. And then always looking for this nice straight line. And I think Dr. Ronning talks about this in his pedagogy classes. Looking for the lines. And so really looking from the line from my biggest knuckles all the way down to my elbow. Maintaining that line, that's going to put your elbow in about the right place. So it's going to take you away from that. It's going to take you away from that. And so
the finger angle is a little bit different between violin, viola, cello, but that the straight line from elbow to first knuckle is the same no matter what instrument we're playing. Well, unless we're playing trombone, they got a different ball of wax altogether.
Right, and so that's our first item of business, and then making sure thumbs behind two, always
behind two
in the lower positions, and then I always tell people it's not nice to stick your thumb out to people, so so thumb needs to go in the middle of the neck.
Okay.
We've got the goofy Samandal hand position where between 1 to 4, that's my A to B, my half step. And so I'll tell students that they have to pretend that they have an imaginary extra finger right there in 1 and 2, so we can get our good half step.
Yeah.
And so that would be bringing the left hand to the bass.
Now, a lot of the students that I've started on bass are very confused that, and this is exactly what you just said, that 1 and 2 is a half step, but then 2 and 4 is a half step, but look at all that space there. So is that convincing them that the space is here?
Right.
And then we have this finger here that's the space. So we need to imagine imaginary finger going on between 1 and 2.
Correct. Yeah, and they'll make jokes about the Samandal salute.
That's funny.
The Samandal salute. Yeah. And so to have that good space there between 1 and 2 is really, really important.
Now, so I've got my left hand position. I can hold a bow kind of okay. Maybe I'm a cello player, and I'm starting to try and fiddle around, if you'll pardon the pun, with playing bass and getting from open string all the way up and across. It's going to sound like I'm missing a finger, or that maybe the whole thing is tuned wrong. How do we start to think in fourths instead of in fifths?
Yeah, so essentially you just get 3 letters of your alphabet instead of 4. And so just, it's just drilling that, where it's like you're going to get your D, E, F sharp, and then you got to jump right over for your G. And so starting them on the D string, that's going to be familiar to them because that's one end, just like the cello. And then typically if I explain like, no, you're just getting 3 letters per string, that clicks pretty quickly. Adds up. So it's like instead of 4.
I haven't heard it that way either. That's really helpful.
Yeah. So and then just thinking your alphabet. So just drilling that alphabet.
And if we can piggyback that onto an octave is 7 letters with a repeat. So if I can go 6 letters without shifting, how do I get the next 2?
For the bass?
Yeah, so that I can play an octave with the rest of my friends.
Right. So, bass is the only instrument, it's like book 1 that in order to do the D major scale, we're going to have to shift. And so getting them comfortable right away with the D scale in 3rd position is going to be an important thing. And so getting them, some books call this 3rd position, some books call it 4th position. And so it's just going to be, 4th finger D on the G. 3rd position is probably the most common for that. And so that's going to get them all the way up into the octave D there.
So if we start on any open string except for G, we can get O, 014 014 24, and that will make,
Yeah,
okay.
right.
Now, at what point do I need to be worried about other kinds of shifting? Or can I live there for a couple of years?
I mean, it depends on the program and how things are going.
Uh,
So, if we're staying in D, it's going to be a lot of this zone. We head into our G. G would be
uh,
the next most important one, and then C. And then for bass, some of the basses, even in middle school, that want to start doing jazz band, they need
yeah.
to learn their half position
Uh,
quickly, which is going to take us into B flat and F.
and before we move on to some of these materials you sent me, I have a big problem with my students out here in Port Angeles with really consistently getting two in tune.
Mm-hmm.
Because it
Mm-hmm.
kind of has the fewest reference points, at least from a beginner or to an
Right.
intermediate. And at least since Ron Jones retired, they haven't had any, bass specialist
Mm-hmm.
teaching them bass. So how do we find that second finger reference point?
That's going to be that same idea where it's like two has to slice one and four in half.
Okay.
So it's that Samandal salute over and over again.
So if thumb is in the right spot, you'll never be wrong with two. So if our two is wrong, is thumb maybe something we should be looking at?
Right, for
The
sure.
thumb wasn't right.
Yeah, if I bring my thumb up, those fingers are going to go together. If I
Uh-huh.
bring my thumb down, I can kick my first finger back out again.
Mm-hmm.
And so just watching that and then just drilling that idea that these guys need to be broken up for a very long time.
Now, how do we feel about training wheels like stickers? Can we
Well,
have a sticker in the back for where two goes?
well, right now, so like this is my daughter's bass. She's in second grade, so we've got some stickers on here. I've got guitar inlays that I put on with some blue mother of pearl design there.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so these work pretty well. Some of my advanced students will use black fingernail polish
Mm.
for upper notes. Pencil lines are great. For the longest time, we did have one of the stickers in the back for her so she could remember where to keep her thumb. By the time she started remembering, it came off. And
Okay.
so there's that. The other thing you can do to help them, if you have a dry erase marker, you can run
Uh-huh.
that marker in between their first and second finger through their hand, and
Uh-huh.
that keeps the thumb behind two. So with that, I can take the bow and do it, but essentially, it's doing something like this. That's gonna force putting something between the thumb and the.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So then that actually forces the space between one and two.
Mm.
And so I'll have sometimes my students do their scales with a dry erase marker in between, like that.
Okay. Well, so you sent me over some awesome resources here. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the screen share. And
Okay.
why don't you just tell me what we're looking at and how a student might use it? Give me 1 second. The
No
computer is
problem.
asking for permission here. I'm going to go ahead and hit pause on the recording just so we don't.
I can talk about that.
And we're back. We're going to look at the study in C here. Should be popping up on your screen.
And there it is as well.
Now,
These
yeah, go ahead.
great. These are great for the emerging middle school student who's really starting to figure things out. This is from the Melodic Foundation Studies by Thomas Gale. And essentially, he runs down a sequence where you do the scale, then shifting studies, and then the extended scale. This is hands down the trickiest part. Get some shifting. It has them do the arpeggio. And then he has a rhythmic study that supports the bow, and then melodic studies, technical study.
Mm-hmm.
So using these with the emerging middle school student really, really locks them in. And he does it in all the different keys. And so that also gets us out of just getting stuck in the G major, D major rut.
Mm-hmm.
Easily can. And so this takes us around all the keys, major and minor. And so usually each of these with the emerging middle schooler and private lessons, it can,
Yeah.
3 weeks to 4 weeks to get this at a point where it's ready for check off. And so those are some of my favorite exercises right there for the emergent middle schooler. And then for high schoolers that start catching on to things, um, there's both the Jeff Braditich exercises and the Max Dimoff exercises. These are compilations of over the years of pedagogues and
Oh yeah.
contributions. And so it'll be Gary Carr. Diana Gannett has a great collection of these as well, bass warm-ups on her website. And so those are probably starting to get your high schoolers much more advanced to university level.
Uh-huh.
So both of those are great. You'll see both of them start out with what they call the vomit exercises.
I love those. Because
Yes.
any kid of any level, whether they know what a position is or not, they can do that. And
Yes. So just
I like to have
person.
the I learned of them through a book that Sven is a big fan of called the Gaylord Yost exercises for the change of position. And
Mhm.
it's the vomit exercise, but in a very kind of Sven Ronning way, is that it tells you every position to every other position with every finger on every string.
Nice.
And it's almost like the Third Reich put it together. It's very well organized.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So it has those vomit exercises and it gives you other shifting drills and thirds and scales. It borrows from Sevchek, all sorts of things. And so both of those warm up packets are great. And then I think I also included the Sturm etudes.
Yes.
And these can be for high school. There's 110 of them. And these can go all the way through high school, through grad school, just helping you sight read. That's how fast. So it can start out with number one is friendly as just some eighth notes, a nice C major,
Mm-hmm.
where we're flipping further in the book and it gets much more complicated, where we're, doing all the arpeggios and everything like that.
Yep.
And so this is something I typically start these with high schoolers, and then,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, it can last you years. And then growing off of that, then we do go into these Storch-Hrab etudes, and then we go into the Kreutzer studies. So we start borrowing from violins at that point.
They did Kreutzer for bass?
Oh yeah,
That sounds impossible.
they do it. They do it. And so that's like my most advanced high school students and a lot of my college students start doing the Kreutzer etudes, which are fantastic. I mean, there's so much to learn from those.
Mm-hmm.
And then, did you want me to run down kind of like the solo music track that?
Yeah, that would be great. Just from somebody who's never done solo ensemble through up like getting ready for college.
Cool. So for that, I usually start out with two different books and kind of pick and choose from the two. So the Suzuki bass books are great. So books 1, 2, and 3.
And I've got those available for all of my students for free on Smart Music right now.
Awesome.
So they can get into Smart Music anytime and it'll play the accompaniment along with you. You can even slow down the tempo.
Awesome. Awesome.
So for bass kids watching that, these are available to you for free right now.
That's great. Yeah. And I would, just starting at the beginning just to reinforce everything and just build right through it and cruise through it. And then the next sequence, and I don't know if these are on Smart Music or not, it's the Progressive Repertoire books by George Vance. And these are bass gold. And so these 3 books right here can take you all the way from 4th or 5th grade, all the way through high school. Most advanced book, this one ends with the Dragonetti Concerto.
Wow.
So, yeah, so those 3 books are amazing. My favorite book probably in the public school for middle school, high school would be the Red Book, the middle book. And they all come with CDs. They all come with piano accompaniment volumes.
Okay, great.
So those are really fantastic. And then as they start to go from there, the Vivaldi cello sonatas are fantastic. And then I go down Capuzzi Concerto, Dittersdorf Concerto, Dragonetti, Kusevitsky, Bottesini, and then on and beyond. And that's
and
really,
in that order, the Bottesini capstone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly that order. And then from there, we start wildly stealing from violinists and cellists and bassoonists.
And flute players sometimes.
Yep. Yeah. And so then at that point, that's where we really start borrowing
Hmm.
intensely.
Well, that pretty much ran the gamut. I think we're at about the 30-40 minute mark that these things
Oh,
usually run.
right
Uh,
on.
Thank you so much for explaining all of that. I know my bass players hate me sometimes for not being a better bass player, even though I was cordially required at one point as part of my conducting studies to play bass in one
Of
ensemble.
course. Yeah.
But I was just barely surviving at that point. I don't think I was doing the bass any justice. Thank God a lot of that music is just making noise. Uh,
Oh, goodness.
uh,
Yeah.
but it's comforting to know that there are people out there that are really uh, standardizing pedagogy for bass
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and making bass a more important instrument. It can be hard to sit back there in rehearsals and count 38 measures to play your one note that you've been playing since fourth grade, and the conductor spending all the time with the first violins. So for my friends sitting back there feeling like they're doing nothing, what words of encouragement do you have for them to make
Right.
them feel like they are a part of the orchestra and that they are so necessary and so valued and
Right.
respected?
Right. Yeah. It's an interesting perspective. I mean, I can definitely say I don't think I've ever been bored playing bass, and I don't think I've ever felt discouraged or like I wasn't getting attention. Maybe I appreciated not getting attention and getting to do my own thing. So, I mean, I think with it, it's like as a bass player, I mean, we have such great responsibility. Number one's got to be time, and number two's got to be intonation. So
Hmm.
we have to have impeccable time and flawless intonation. And then I think as I get older and I hear my first violin friends complaining lots and lots and lots about how much they have to practice and prepare for things, in my preparation, I need to be warmed up. I need to make sure I know the notes, and there's a few licks in there that I need to look at. But other than that, I mean, outside of orchestra, it's really this open window for me as to what I can explore and what I can do and how far I can push myself. And so I think of it as like you're a part of something bigger. And so there's never been this moment in which I felt like I was ever robbed of getting to play enough notes. And then a lot of the times, if my students come into lessons and they say, orchestra's so boring, I don't want to do orchestra, I give them the ultimate Dale Johnson, show me. And I'll have them play their music. And then it's just like, no, those half notes aren't in time. No, those whole notes are not in tune. And so it's like there's a great responsibility there. We're kind of the secret superheroes, I think, of the orchestra.
Hmm.
And so, anytime somebody says they pose, oh, I'm bored or I'm playing the cello part, I was like, no, you play the bass and play it well. And so I think if you can really cultivate the students into thinking that. And the other thing is once they start getting good at the timing and the intonation, you can really manipulate the whole orchestra from the bass section.
Yes, absolutely.
And in a good way, I would hope. So, I
Well,
mean,
there's always going to be that one first violin player that manages to make the whole orchestra rush by at least 10 clicks. And
exactly,
if you've
exactly.
got even one stubborn bass player, and there was one in my last gig that we are familiar with that would always stop that one first violin player. It was not going any further.
Right, right. Yeah. And so, yeah, so I mean, I would just encourage them, it's like aim for your very best and, as close to perfection as you can. And
Mhm.
that's usually the keywords for me. When somebody says I'm bored, then I say, show me.
Yep. So to wrap this up, there's one question I ask all of my guests, and it's if you could go back in time and talk to a young Dr. Jensen about to start music for the first time, is there anything that you wish you could tell yourself to either become encouraged or to avoid disencouragement that you encountered along the way?
Right. I think if I would have known that things were going to be as much fun and as awesome as they are now, I think the discouragement and the bumps along the way would have bothered me a lot less. And so I think that if I would have had a little glimpse into, you know, how cool and amazing things could be once you get through all those bumps and those hurdles, I think I would have enjoyed the process a lot more.
Hmm.
And so I think, you know, it's like, I talk to a lot of my students where it's like, I was talking to one of my classes the other day and I said to them, I was like, how many times do you guys think I've failed? And they're like, never. And I was like, oh, millions of times. And I think, you know, to my younger self, I think I would have told myself to, you know, maybe enjoy the failures a little bit more and to let them just brush off my shoulders a little bit easier, instead of taking things so personally.
All right. Well, I think that wraps up our conversation. Thank you so much for coming on.
All
I
right.
really
Thank you,
appreciate
Mr.
it.
Rodall.
All right. Bye bye.